What if everything you were taught about the beginning of the world was just a convenient translation of a much older, darker, and more powerful truth? What if the Garden of Eden wasn't a myth from the Middle East, but a high-tech spiritual civilization lost in the heart of Africa long before the first word of the Bible was ever whispered? Today, we are peeling back the layers of a global blackout to reveal the African Eden, the paradise before Adam and Eve. We're going beyond the fossils and the primitive labels to uncover a world of star maps, binary codes, and the original God seed that still flows in your veins. This isn't just history. It's a memory you were forced to forget. And once you hear it, the way you see yourself and the world will never be the same. Before we step into the first sunrise of humanity, join this circle of seekers. Hit that subscribe button, light up the like, and tell me in the comments, from which part of this great earth are you listening to this ancestral revelation? Long before the first scroll was inked or cathedrals dared to pierce the sky, the red earth of the Rift Valley throbbed with the beat of a conscious heart. It wasn't just mud and dust. It was the laboratory of an intelligence that modern science, in all its high and mighty pride, took millennia to even start decoding. While the rest of the world was still snoozing in the silence of unconsciousness, the lineage of a single, extraordinary woman began weaving the code we carry in every cell, proving the cradle was never a myth, but a precise biological address. They say the original sin was the quest for knowledge, but out on the primordial savannah, knowledge was survival itself and a direct line to the all. The Eve that genetic labs are so busy tracking these days didn't spend her time munching on forbidden fruit. She carried the seed of every nation that would ever walk this earth in her womb. It's a bit rich, isn't it? That humanity spent centuries squinting at the horizon for a mystical garden, when the blueprint of creation was written in African blood the whole time. This ancestral mother wasn't some lonely figure in a static painting, but the keeper of a flame destined to spark across every continent, carrying the memory of a time when spirit and matter weren't at each other's throats. She didn't see the sky as a ceiling, but as a mirror of her own soul, savvy enough to know that every star had a name and every beast a lesson in power. Paradise wasn't about lounging around. It was the peak of a harmony that modern man, in his blind rush, has simply forgotten how to tune into. The journey of this primal consciousness didn't just stop at biology. It seeped into the very frequencies of the earth, spinning an invisible web of wisdom that still vibrates under our feet. The rituals that folks today dismiss as mere folklore were actually high-tech ways to plug into that original matrix. A spiritual database that was never deleted, just buried under layers of historical dust. She, the one who started it all, left clues not on paper, but in symbols that only a heart willing to unlearn can truly spot. Though the world has tried its best to shove this origin story to the sidelines, labeling the cradle as savage, the fact is that the foundations of every great civilization were laid on this hallowed ground. The fall wasn't about a garden. It was a collective blackout that cut us off from our true power source. And while archaeologists are busy digging for old bones, they're missing the monuments of energy, still whispering about a time when man and the divine walked side by side, leaving footprints that lead straight to a stone clock, marking the dawn of everything. In the heart of South Africa, nestled amidst the rolling hills of Mpumalanga, lies a complex of stones so ancient they make the Great Pyramids look like new construction. It's funny, really, how civilized history conveniently overlooks a site that's been counting the stars for over 75,000 years, long before the first city-state was even a glimmer in an architect's eye. This isn't just a pile of rocks. It's a sophisticated lithic masterpiece known as Adam's Calendar, a place where time itself was first captured and measured by human hands. The mystery deepens when you realize these stones weren't just dragged here for the view. They are perfectly aligned with the solstices, equinoxes, and the distant constellation of Orion. Scientists call it Inzalo Yilanga, the birthplace of the sun, and the precision is enough to give any modern engineer a headache. You have to wonder why the history books are so quiet about a civilization that was tracking the cosmos while everyone else was supposedly just figuring out fire. It's as if someone decided that certain chapters of our story were better left unread. Walking through these ruins, you can almost hear the low hum of the earth, a vibration that suggests these stones were more than just markers. They were conductors of a forgotten energy. The elders say this was a place of high ritual, where the veil between the physical and the celestial was thin enough to step through. The air here feels heavy with the scent of ancient rain and sun-scorched earth, carrying the echoes of chants that synchronize the human heartbeat with the rhythm of the galaxy. This wasn't just about telling time, it was about being in time, a spiritual technology that understood the universe as a living, breathing entity. The symbols carved into the landscape whisper of a deep connection to the star people, suggesting that our ancestors weren't looking up in fear, but in recognition. It's a bit of a slap in the face to the primitive label we've slapped on them, revealing a society that possessed a cosmic literacy we are only now beginning to rediscover in our own frantic age. But as the sun sets over the stone circles, casting long shadows that point toward the next great enigma, we are left with more questions than answers about the people who built this. Their legacy was buried, ignored and dismissed, yet the stones remain, stubbornly refusing to crumble into the accepted timeline. This solar clock is still ticking, reminding us that the dawn of human genius didn't start where we were told. And if they were this advanced back then, what else were they capable of that we've completely forgotten? Deep beneath the sun-baked crust of the African continent lies a secret that makes modern bank vaults look like child's play. The oldest mines on the planet. We're talking about excavations that date back over 40,000 years, long before anyone supposedly knew what a precious metal was. It's quite the cosmic joke, isn't it? That while mainstream history claims our ancestors were barely scraping by with flint and bone, they were actually deep underground, hauling out tons of hematite and gold for reasons that definitely weren't about jewelry. The scale of these ancient operations suggests an industrial focus that shouldn't exist in the Stone Age, pointing to a massive organized effort to harvest the Earth's marrow. In places like the Lion Cavern in Swaziland, the sheer volume of material removed is staggering, leaving us to wonder who exactly was placing the order for all that ore. It's almost as if a higher intelligence, or perhaps a very demanding divine class, needed these minerals for something far more complex than a simple spearhead. Legend whispers that this gold wasn't just for show, it was the flesh of the gods, a conductor for the very essence of immortality. In the dim light of flickering torches, ancient miners didn't see just yellow metal, they saw trapped sunlight, a material capable of bridging the gap between the decaying body and the eternal spirit. The air in those deep shafts would have been thick with the smell of metallic dust and sweat. A ritualistic labor where every strike of the tool was an act of summoning the power of the sun from the dark womb of the earth. This obsession with gold created a spiritual bridge between the African soil and the distant heavens, a connection that would later be mirrored by every major empire from Sumer to Rome. The alchemical secrets of these early miners were the first true science, a way to manipulate the physical world to achieve a metaphysical result. They understood that certain elements could anchor the soul to the physical plane, a bit of high-tech spirituality that we now dismiss as mere superstition because we can't replicate their results. But as these ancient shafts were eventually abandoned or filled in by the shifting sands of time, the true purpose of the gold of the gods was distorted into a simple greed for wealth. The spiritual technology was lost, replaced by the clink of coins and the shackles of slavery. Yet the original mines still sit there, hollowed out and silent. They remain as a haunting reminder that the first quest for the infinite didn't happen in a laboratory, but in the dark, silent depths of the African earth. In the lush valleys and shaded groves of the ancient continent, the serpent wasn't a villain waiting to trip up humanity. It was the keeper of the umbilical cord between the heavens and the earth. It's funny how a creature that once represented the infinite cycle of rebirth and the shedding of old skins got such a bad rap in the later Desert Scrolls. To the ancestors, the snake wasn't a liar, it was a professor of transformation, curling around the tree of life not to steal a soul, but to protect the gateway to higher consciousness. The irony is thick enough to cut with a knife. The very symbol that represented the Great Mother and the flow of divine energy was flipped on its head and turned into the face of evil. While the African initiates saw the serpent as the rising kundalini, the fire in the spine that wakes up the brain, the newer narratives decided that a little bit of wisdom was a dangerous thing. It makes you wonder why the powers that be were so desperate to turn a symbol of healing and eternity into a monster that needed to be crushed under a heel. Imagine the high priests of old, draped in emerald-patterned silks, watching the python move with a grace that mimicked the flow of the great river itself. They understood that the serpent's tongue was split because it spoke the language of duality, the balance between the seen and the unseen, the physical and the astral. The scent of crushed herbs and damp earth filled the air during ceremonies where the serpent was invited to dance, a ritual intended to align the human spirit with the raw serpentine vibrations of the planet's core. This wasn't just some primitive snake worship. It was a sophisticated understanding of the nervous system and the way energy coils within the human body. The serpent was the bridge, the ladder that allowed a mere mortal to climb out of the mud and touch the stars. By rebranding this guardian as a tempter, the architects of modern dogma effectively locked the door to our own internal power, making us look outward for a salvation that was always meant to be found by looking within. As the old shrines were dismantled and the sacred groves were burned to make way for the new order, the serpent retreated into the shadows of the subconscious. The symbol survived in the uraeus on the foreheads of pharaohs and the dambala of the deep forest. But the world at large chose the story of the fall over the reality of the rise. Yet the snake still waits in the grass of our history, whispering that the wisdom we were told was forbidden is actually our greatest birthright. It's a bit of a head-scratcher why the map of paradise in the old books seems to have a selective memory when it comes to African geography. The ancient texts speak of 4 great rivers flowing out of the Eden, and while people have spent centuries looking at the dry sands of the Middle East, they've been ignoring the massive ghost river systems that once turned the Sahara into a lush green heartland. It's almost as if the historians decided to draw the borders of the garden just far enough away to keep the real source a secret from the rest of us. Geology doesn't lie, though, and it's revealing a past that makes the empty desert narrative look like a total fairy tale. Beneath the shifting dunes, radar technology has uncovered the Trans-Saharan River System, a network of water that once rivaled the Nile and supported a paradise of megalakes and forests. It's a bit rich to call it a wasteland now, when only a few thousand years ago, this was the most fertile ground on the planet, a literal Eden, where the water flowed exactly where the holy descriptions say it should. Picture a world where the air was thick with the perfume of blooming acacias and the sound of rushing waterfalls echoed across what is now a silent sea of sand. The ancestors lived in a landscape where every river was a vein of the Earth Mother, providing not just fish and water, but a highway for the first great exchange of ideas and spirits. This wasn't a struggle for survival. It was a life of abundance, where the rivers of life were a physical reality that shaped the very first concepts of heaven on earth. The spiritual weight of these waters was immense, as the flow of a river was seen as the flow of time and the continuity of the lineage. Rituals were performed at the confluences, those sacred X marks on the map where different energies met, to ensure that the soul, like the water, would eventually find its way back to the great ocean of the ancestors. The disappearance of these rivers wasn't just a climate shift. To the people who remained, it felt like the earth itself was withdrawing its grace, forcing the expulsion from the green paradise into a harsher, thirstier world. As the waters retreated and the green turned to gold, the memory of this African Eden was carried north and east, eventually being repackaged into the stories we know today. The four rivers were given new names, and the original African landscape was replaced by a more convenient location for the rising empires. But the ancient riverbeds are still there, etched into the bedrock like a thumbprint of the Creator, waiting for the moment we realize that the water we're looking for has been under our feet the whole time. Deep in the heart of Mali, the Dogon people have been sitting on a cosmic secret that makes the experts in their white lab coats look a little late to the party. For centuries, these desert stargazers have described the Sirius star system with a precision that should have been impossible without a modern telescope, including the existence of a tiny, heavy white dwarf star that's invisible to the naked eye. It's pretty funny, really, how advanced science spent years dismissing this as myth, only to find out in the 20th century that the Dogon were right all along. They don't claim to have invented this knowledge. They say it was a gift from the Nomos, amphibious beings who descended from the sky in a great vessel of fire and thunder. According to their oral maps, the universe is an infinite spiral of vibrating matter, and our little corner of it is just one small part of a much larger living organism. It's a bit of a blow to the ego of modern astronomers to realize that while their ancestors were still arguing if the Earth was flat, the Dogon were already calculating the orbital periods of distant suns. The rituals of the Sigui, performed every 60 years to coincide with these celestial cycles, are not just dances, they are complex mathematical enactments of the cosmos, draped in elaborate masks and moving to the rhythm of drums that mimic the vibration of the Potolo, the seed star. The initiates become the stars themselves. The air during these festivals is thick with the scent of fermented grain and the dust of 1,000 dancing feet, a sensory overload designed to collapse the distance between a man on the ground and a star in the sky. This wasn't just stargazing. It was a profound spiritual technology that understood the Amma, the egg of the universe, as a source of all things where the spiritual and the material are woven into the same fabric. The Dogon knew that everything in the heavens had a counterpart on Earth, and that by tracking the stars, they were actually tracking the evolution of human consciousness. To them, the star people weren't aliens from a movie. They were the architects of the very garden we call home, leaving behind a blueprint that Western science is still trying to read. As the world outside catches up, the Dogon continue to watch the sky, unfazed by the sudden interest of the civilized world. Their knowledge remains a thorn in the side of those who want to believe that wisdom only flows from the north to the south. But the stars don't care about our history books, and as the great Sirius system continues its silent dance, we have to wonder, if the Dogon were right about the stars we can't see, what else are they right about regarding the origins of our world? In the shadows of the Great Nile, long before the first stone of Giza was laid, the god Khnum sat at his potter's wheel, molding the first humans from the rich, black silt of the riverbank. It's quite the coincidence, isn't it, that the clay mentioned in later scriptures bears a striking resemblance to the African mud used by this ram-headed deity to fashion the Ka, or the vital spark of life. While the world praises later tales for their poetry, they often forget that the blueprint for the creation of man was already spinning on a wheel in the heart of Africa. This wasn't just a simple craft. It was a divine alchemy where the minerals of the earth were infused with the breath of the stars. Khnum didn't just make a body, he sculpted the invisible double, the spirit that survives the grave, ensuring that every human carried a piece of the cosmos within their physical shell. It's a bit ironic that we've spent so much time debating the breath of life in a vacuum, while the ancient Africans were already documenting the exact intersection where chemistry becomes consciousness. Imagine the heat of the potter's workshop, the rhythmic slap-slap of wet clay, and the smell of ozone and damp earth as a new soul was brought into being. The wheel represented the rotation of the heavens, a cycle that never ends, reminding us that we are constantly being reshaped by the hands of the great architect. To the initiates, this meant that the human body was a temple under construction, a vessel designed to hold the Logos long before that word was ever whispered in a Greek classroom. This spiritual technology understood that the clay wasn't just dirt. It was a sophisticated medium capable of holding memory and frequency. By molding the human form from the very soil of the continent, Khnum anchored our species to the frequency of the earth itself, making us literal children of the ground we walk on. It's a stark contrast to the modern idea of being strangers in a strange land. In the African Eden, we were the land, molded by a master who knew exactly what ingredients were needed for divinity. But as the story moved from the potter's wheel to the written page, the tactile reality of Khnum's work was smoothed over and turned into an abstract miracle. The connection between the mineral kingdom and our own DNA was lost in translation, leaving us to wonder why we feel so disconnected from the planet. Yet every time we feel the pull of the earth or the rhythm of a spinning cycle, we are catching a glimpse of the original workshop, where the wheel is still turning and the potter is still at work. In the rugged highlands of Zimbabwe and the silent expanses of the Limpopo, there are cities of stone that the history books tried to write off as impossible for the local hands to build. It's almost laughable, really, how European explorers, stumbling upon the towering walls of Great Zimbabwe, insisted they must have been built by Phoenicians or the Queen of Sheba. They simply couldn't wrap their heads around the fact that a massive, sophisticated empire was thriving here, while most of Europe was still stumbling through the dark ages in wooden huts. These weren't just fortified towns, they were the beating hearts of an economic and spiritual powerhouse known as Monomotapa. The walls were built without a single drop of mortar, stone resting on stone with a precision that has survived centuries of rain and wind. It's a bit of a slap in the face to the narrative that Africa was a land of tribes without a plan, when these ruins reveal a complex urban layout designed to channel both trade and cosmic energy through the very veins of the city. Walking through the narrow, curving passages of the great enclosure, you feel the temperature drop and the air grow still, as if the stones themselves are holding their breath. The scent of wild sage and sun-baked granite fills the air, and the silence is so heavy it hums. This was a place where the king, the Mwene Mutapa, acted as the sun on earth, his health tied directly to the prosperity of the land. The architecture wasn't just for defense, it was a giant stone resonator, amplifying the spiritual authority of a lineage that claimed descent from the stars. The birds of soapstone that guarded these walls weren't just decorations. They were the messengers between the world of the living and the realm of the ancestors. They represented a bridge of consciousness, a reminder that the city extended far beyond the physical stones into the invisible dimensions of the spirit. The Monomotapa understood that a civilization is only as strong as its connection to its roots, a concept that modern concrete jungles have completely traded away for a bit of convenience and glass. But as the gold trade shifted and the pressures of external greed began to claw at the borders, the great stone cities were slowly reclaimed by the bush. The history was rewritten to suit the conquerors, turning a golden age of African architecture into a mystery that needed a foreign explanation. Yet the walls still stand, defiant and mute, mocking the maps that try to say they don't belong there. They are the skeletal remains of a giant that is starting to wake up, proving that the foundation of the African Eden was made of more than just myths. In the ancient courtrooms of the Nile and the council fires of the Sahel, there was a law that didn't need to be written on paper because it was etched into the very fabric of the soul, Ma'at. It's quite telling, isn't it, that long before the world was introduced to the heavy burden of original sin, there was a system based on original balance. While later cultures focused on avoiding hellfire, the African Eden was obsessed with maintaining the harmony of the cosmos, believing that every action, from the king's decree to a child's whisper, either fed the truth or fed the chaos. The irony of our modern moral compass is that we've traded this internal scale for a list of external thou shalt nots. In the old way, your heart wasn't judged by how many rules you followed, but by how light it was when weighed against a feather. It's a bit of a sophisticated jab at our current systems of guilt, suggesting that the fall wasn't a moral failure, but a loss of equilibrium. We didn't get kicked out of the garden for being bad. We just forgot how to stay in tune with the rhythm of the universe. Imagine the weighing of the heart in the Great Hall, where the air smelled of blue lotus and the silence of the scales was the only sound that mattered. The feather of Ma'at wasn't a threat, but a standard of purity, a reminder that the soul's natural state is as light as air. To the ancestors, sin was simply a blockage of energy, a stone in the river of life that needed to be cleared so the spirit could flow back to the source. It was a technology of the conscience, designed to keep the human heart as vibrant and clear as the African sun. This wasn't just abstract philosophy. It was a blueprint for a society where justice meant restoration rather than punishment. By seeing every human as a microcosm of the universe, the followers of Ma'at understood that to hurt another was to throw the entire cosmos out of whack. It's a level of social and spiritual intelligence that makes our current legal bickering look like a playground dispute. The law wasn't something you obeyed out of fear, but something you embodied to ensure the stars kept moving and the seasons kept turning. But as the world grew louder and more fragmented, the delicate scale of Ma'at was tossed aside for the iron fist of dogma. The feather was replaced by the sword, and the lightness of being was swapped for a heavy coat of shame that the world hasn't been able to take off since. Yet that internal scale hasn't disappeared. It's still there, buried under layers of modern noise. Every time we feel that tug of conscience, we are hearing the faint, ancient echo of a time when the heart was light and the garden was wherever truth resided. Deep in the heart of the savannah, the baobab stands as a gnarled, upside-down giant, reaching its root-like branches toward the sky to drink from the celestial rivers. It's quite the visual metaphor, isn't it? A tree that looks like it was planted by the gods themselves to serve as a living library of water and time. Long before the Tree of Life became a decorative motif in Western art, this wooden titan was the actual center of the African Eden, a sanctuary that held the secrets of survival in a single, massive trunk. The irony of the forbidden tree in later myths is that in the African tradition, the tree was never something to fear, but a place to gather. While some stories suggest that eating from a tree brought death, the baobab offered exactly the opposite, a source of life that could outlast the harshest droughts. It's a bit of a cheeky reversal of the narrative, don't you think? That the real tree of life wasn't a trap for the soul, but a resilient guardian that whispered, "Eat, drink, and remember who you are." Imagine a village gathering beneath the sprawling shadow of a 1,000-year-old baobab, the air cooling as the sun dips below the horizon. The scent of dry grass and the distant musk of rain hang in the air while the elders lean against the bark, which feels like ancient, wrinkled skin. To touch a baobab was to touch the ancestors themselves, for it was believed that the spirits of the wise moved into the wood when their time on the ground was done. It wasn't a hollow symbol, it was a living bridge between the dirt and the stars. This wasn't just about shade and fruit, it was a spiritual antenna. The hollows of the tree were often used as shrines or even tombs, turning the wood into a literal vessel for the transition between worlds. The ancestors understood that the baobab didn't just grow in the earth. It anchored the human experience to the planet's pulse. It stood as a silent witness to every fall and every rise, holding the memory of a time when the world was green and the conversation between man and nature hadn't yet been silenced by the hum of machines. But as the world moved into the era of concrete and steel, the baobab became just another botanical curiosity for travelers to photograph. We've forgotten how to sit and listen to the wind in its branches, trade-offs for a life lived at high speed and low depth. Yet these giants refuse to die, some living for over 2,000 years, patiently waiting for us to return to the shade. They are the true elders of the Eden, standing watch until we are ready to ask the questions that only a tree that has seen the dawn of time can answer. In the ancient accounts of the desert and the high plateaus, there appears a figure that has puzzled theologians for centuries: Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, who had neither father nor mother. It's quite a bit of historical irony that while the Western world tries to claim him as a mystery from the Levant, the oldest traditions of the Nile and the highlands of Kush point to a lineage of sun kings who lived this reality long before the Bible was a thought. This wasn't a man, but a title, a placeholder for a priesthood that originated in the African Eden, carrying a spiritual authority that even the greatest prophets had to bow to. The Order of Melchizedek wasn't just a religious club, it was a high-level spiritual frequency that connected the kings of the south to the laws of the cosmos. While later religions struggled to define their lineage through blood and paper, these African priest kings defined theirs through the light they could hold in their bodies. It's a bit of a sophisticated jab at our obsession with ancestry, isn't it? To realize that the most sacred authority in the scriptures actually traces its roots back to the black-skinned initiates of the African sun. Picture the meeting between the desert wanderer and the priest of the high sun, where the air was thick with the scent of frankincense and the ground felt like it was vibrating with a low choral hum. There were no temples made of stone for this order. The body itself was the altar, and the bread and wine were symbols of the solar and lunar energies being balanced within the human vessel. To receive a blessing from this lineage was to have your DNA tuned to the original frequency of the garden, a cosmic reboot that restored the connection to the all. This wasn't about worship in the way we think of it now. It was about the science of the soul, a technology of immortality that allowed these kings to rule for centuries in the legends. They were the keepers of the way, ensuring that the wisdom of the African Eden didn't evaporate as the world began to drift into the fog of materialism. By holding the line between the physical and the metaphysical, they acted as a living bridge, keeping the paradise state accessible to those who knew how to ask. But as the ages turned and the heart of Africa was raided for its secrets and its people, the Order of Melchizedek was scrubbed from the maps. The title was appropriated, and the African faces of the original priests were replaced by paler shadows in the stained glass of the north. Yet, the Order isn't a historical relic. It's a vibration that still exists in the quiet spaces of the continent. It's waiting for a new generation of kings and queens to realize that their authority doesn't come from a crown, but from the ancient sun that still burns in their bones. Long before the world heard the story of a wooden ark and a mountaintop, the elders of the Niger and the Congo were already telling of the great washing of the earth. It's quite the cosmic wink, isn't it? That while the official history books focus on a single flood in the Middle East, the oral traditions of Africa, some of the oldest on the planet, contain vivid memories of a time when the sky fell and the land was swallowed by the deep. It's almost as if the flood wasn't a local disaster, but a global reset that started its countdown in the heart of the motherland. The irony of the Noachian story is how it turned a collective human trauma into a tale of a few chosen survivors, while the African legends speak of a much more complex transition. In the stories of the Bantu and the Yoruba, the water wasn't just a punishment, it was a cleaning of the slate, a moment where the first world of the African Eden had to be submerged because the balance of Ma'at had been tilted too far toward chaos. It's a bit of a sophisticated jab at the guilt narrative, suggesting that the earth itself has a self-cleaning mechanism for when we forget our place in the garden. Imagine the sudden shift in the air, the smell of ozone becoming overwhelming, and the birds falling silent as the horizon turned into a wall of dark, churning water. The ancestors didn't just build boats, they moved to the high places, the mountain peaks of the Moon and the Drakensberg, carrying the seeds of the old world in their memory and their blood. The sound of the deluge wasn't just rain, it was the roar of the planet reclaiming its purity, a sensory reset that would leave the survivors standing on a brand new and much lonelier shore. This wasn't just about surviving a storm, it was about the preservation of the God seed within the human spirit. The African flood myths emphasized that those who survived were the ones who hadn't lost their inner rhythm, the people who were still in tune with the vibration of the earth. By surviving the waters, they ensured that the wisdom of the Eden would trickle down into the new world, even if it had to be hidden in parables and dances to avoid being lost again in the mud of rising empires. As the waters eventually receded and the sun dried the new coastlines, the survivors looked out over a world that was forever changed. The garden was gone, buried under layers of silt and myth, replaced by the struggle for a new identity. Yet the memory of that primordial water is still tucked away in the African psyche, surfacing in the way we honor the river spirits and the deep blue of the sea. The flood didn't end the story, it just moved the garden from the physical world into the realm of the soul, where the next great enigma is waiting to be uncovered. It's a bit of a slap in the face to modern art critics to realize that the abstract patterns on ancient African masks aren't just for show. They're a sophisticated language of geometry and math. Long before the Greeks were scratching triangles in the sand, the artisans of the Congo and the West Coast were carving the secrets of the universe into wood and bronze. It's pretty ironic, isn't it, that what the world labeled as primitive art was actually a series of three-dimensional blueprints for the same fractal mathematics that power our modern computers today. These masks weren't designed to be hung on a museum wall. They were high-tech spiritual interfaces built to bridge the gap between human sight and the hidden dimensions of the Nyama. Every line, curve, and recurring pattern was a deliberate calculation meant to resonate with the frequencies of specific spirits or cosmic laws. It's a bit of a cheeky revelation, suggesting that while the civilized world was obsessed with making things look real, the African masters were busy making things that worked on a quantum level. Imagine the flickering firelight of a midnight ceremony, the air thick with the scent of burning copal and the metallic tang of ritual iron. As the dancer moves, the geometric patterns on the mask begin to vibrate, creating a visual strobe effect that shuts down the logical brain and opens the door to the ancestral web. The sound of the wood hitting the air is like a rhythmic code, unlocking a sensory experience where the wearer is no longer a man, but a vessel for the very laws of physics that hold the stars in place. This wasn't just religion. It was a tactile science of the soul. The ancestors understood that the universe is made of repeating patterns, spirals, hexagons, and golden ratios, and that by wearing these shapes, you could hack your own consciousness. They were using sacred geometry to maintain the balance of the African Eden, ensuring that the human community stayed aligned with the mathematical precision of the divine architect. It's a level of sophistication that makes our current digital screens look like crude toys in comparison. But as these masks were stolen and discovered by the West, their true function was ignored, and they were stripped of their power to be sold as curiosities. The code was broken, and the spiritual technology was reduced to a mere aesthetic for the elite. Yet, the geometry remains, etched into the grain of the wood, waiting for someone to recognize that the patterns are still live. They are the silent software of the first paradise, reminding us that the key to the future has always been carved into the faces of our past. It's a bit of a convenient oversight in the official record that whenever a massive stone monument or an advanced astronomical site is found in Africa, the first instinct of the experts is to look for a foreign architect. For over a century, the towering ruins of Kush and the sprawling cities of the Great Enclosure were treated like historical accidents, mysteries that just had to have been solved by anyone other than the people living there. It's pretty rich, really, that the very people who defined civilization spent so much energy trying to prove it couldn't possibly have started in its own cradle. The irony is that while these sites were being dismissed as primitive, they were actually hiding a level of archaeological complexity that would make a modern city planner blush. From the sophisticated water cooling systems of the Sudanese pyramids to the acoustic engineering of the Nigerian earthworks, the evidence points to a continent that was high-tech before the term even existed. It's a bit of a sophisticated jab at the Eurocentric ego, realizing that while the North was struggling with the basics, the African Eden was already perfecting the arts of stone and star. Picture the dusty archives of the 19th century, where men in pith helmets scratched out African and wrote unknown over maps of sprawling empires. The air in those rooms was stale with the smell of ink and prejudice, a stark contrast to the vibrant, sun-drenched reality of the sites they were erasing. To acknowledge the true scale of African achievement would have meant acknowledging the true scale of the fall, not from a garden of fruit, but from a peak of human genius that the world wasn't ready to admit it had lost. This wasn't just about ignoring buildings, it was about deleting the spiritual hardware that made them possible. By labeling these structures as enigmas, the architects of history ensured that the connection between the African soil and the origins of human wisdom remained broken. They turned a living lineage into a collection of ruins, making sure that the heirs of this paradise would see themselves as newcomers to a world their ancestors actually built from the ground up. But as the Earth begins to give up its secrets through satellite imagery and DNA testing, the accepted timeline is starting to look more like a tattered rug. The stones are talking again, and they're not speaking in foreign tongues. They're whispering in the dialects of the Niger, the Nile, and the Zambezi. The erasure was never permanent, just a long, quiet interval in a story that refuses to stay buried. We are finally beginning to see that the mystery wasn't in the stones themselves, but in the eyes of those who refused to see who really placed them there. In the deep stillness of the inner sanctum, the ancient priests didn't use words to reach the divine. They used the great hum, a sophisticated science of sound that modern physics is only now beginning to call resonance. And it's quite the cosmic irony that while we pride ourselves on our noisy digital world, the ancestors were using infrasonic frequencies to literally shift the molecular structure of their reality. They understood that the African Eden wasn't built on silence, but on a specific vibration that could heal the body and open the third eye without a single pill or wire. The primitive drum wasn't just a musical instrument, it was a rhythmic heart-lung machine designed to synchronize the human nervous system with the frequency of the earth, known today as the Schumann resonance. It's a bit of a cheeky revelation, isn't it? To realize that while we're buying noise-canceling headphones to find peace, the ancients were using sound to hack the brain's alpha waves and achieve states of consciousness that would make a modern monk jealous. They weren't just making noise, they were tuning the human vessel to the key of the universe. Imagine the air in a limestone cavern, thick with the scent of burning resins and the low, chest-thumping vibration of a 10-foot-tall wooden drum. As the frequency drops below the range of human hearing, the very marrow in your bones begins to itch, and the boundaries between your skin and the air seem to dissolve. This was the sonic gate, a ritualistic technology that allowed the initiate to travel the astral planes of the Eden while their body remained anchored to the African soil. It was a sensory takeover, a total immersion in the word that existed before the world began. This wasn't just mysticism, it was a precise understanding of how sound waves interact with matter and spirit. The ancestors knew that every organ in the body has its own note, and that by playing the right rhythm, they could reset a person to their original paradisiacal state. It was a form of alchemical tuning that kept the community in harmony with the cycles of the moon and the stars, ensuring that the fall into disharmony was kept at bay through the power of the beat. But as the civilized world moved in, these sacred frequencies were labeled as heathen noise and suppressed in favor of silent, sterile pews. The connection between the ear and the soul was severed, leaving us in a world full of static and stress. Yet, the rhythm never truly died. It just went underground, surviving in the jazz, the blues, and the deep bass of the diaspora. The drums are still calling, reminding us that the way back to the garden isn't through a map, but through a frequency that we've carried in our blood since the first sunrise. It's a bit of a historical oops that while the world was taught to believe the Americas were a lonely wilderness until 1492, the sailors of the Mali Empire were already crossing the Atlantic with the confidence of men who knew exactly where they were going. In the 13th century, Mansa Abu Bakr II didn't just look at the horizon, he launched a fleet of thousands of ships into the dark sea to see what lay on the other side. It's pretty rich, isn't it, that we still cling to the story of 3 small Spanish boats, while the evidence of African presence, from giant Olmec stone heads with familiar features to West African gold found in ancient Caribbean soil, sits right in front of our faces. The irony is that the New World wasn't new at all to the heirs of the African Eden. It was just a distant garden they had been visiting for centuries through the river of the ocean. While modern textbooks act like the Atlantic was an impassable wall, the ancient currents knew better, acting as a natural conveyor belt that linked the Gulf of Guinea to the Americas. It's a sophisticated jab at the narrative of isolation, suggesting that the garden was never confined to one continent, but was a global network of trade and spirit that the North simply wasn't invited to yet. Imagine the sight of a Malian vessel, its sails catching the trade winds, carrying not just gold and cloth, but the nyama, the vital life force of the motherland. The air on those ships would have smelled of salt, dried fish, and the herbal charms of the priests who ensured the waters remained calm. To the people on the other side, these arrivals weren't conquerors bringing smallpox and steel, but black gods or merchant kings who exchanged the secrets of the sun for the wisdom of the jaguar. It was a meeting of two paradises, a spiritual handshake between the pyramids of the Nile and the mounds of the Mississippi. This wasn't just about moving goods. It was about the cross-pollination of the soul. The similarities between the mound builders of America and the architects of West Africa aren't coincidences. They are the blueprints of the same original Eden being replanted in new soil. By maintaining these connections, the ancestors ensured that the frequency of the African motherland was anchored in the Americas long before the first slave ship ever cast a shadow on the coast. It was a preemptive strike of consciousness, a way of saying that the garden belongs to those who know how to navigate the stars. But as the Age of Discovery was rewritten to favor the colonizer, these transatlantic bridges were burned out of the history books. The African mariner was turned into a myth, and the shared heritage of the two continents was buried under the weight of the manifest destiny lie. Yet the currents haven't changed, and the stones don't forget. The African Eden was never a prison, it was a launching pad. And as we rediscover these forbidden connections, we realize that the world has always been much smaller and much more African than we were ever told. In the searing heat of the African forge, the first alchemists weren't turning lead into gold. They were turning the very bones of the earth into the sovereign metal of power, iron. It's a bit of a sophisticated irony, isn't it? That while the rest of the world was still chipping away at stones, the masters of the African Eden were already manipulating the invisible atoms of the earth to create a tool that could both build a civilization and defend its spirit. They didn't see the forge as a factory, but as a womb, a place where the masculine fire met the feminine ore to birth a new era of human capability. The blacksmith wasn't just a laborer, he was a high-level spiritual engineer, a keeper of the secrets of the forge, who lived on the edge of the village because his power was considered too volatile for the uninitiated. It's pretty rich how modern history treats the Iron Age as a simple technological step, conveniently forgetting the complex rituals and forbidden knowledge required to coax the spirit of the metal out of the rock. In the African tradition, the blacksmith was a magician who understood that to change the world, you first had to master the element of fire, the same fire that supposedly guarded the gates of the original garden. Imagine the midnight glow of the furnace, the air heavy with the scent of charcoal and the rhythmic clack of bellows that sounded like a giant breathing in the dark. The master of the flame would whisper incantations to the ore, treating the melting metal as a living being that was being refined and purified. This wasn't just metallurgy, it was a physical manifestation of the soul's journey, being tested by the heat of life until only the strongest, most resilient part remained. To hold a blade or a tool from this forge was to hold a piece of harnessed lightning, a tangible connection to the creative force of the Eden. This spiritual technology created a caste of Iron Kings, who understood that true power comes from the ability to transform the environment without losing one's soul in the process. They were the first to understand that the tools we create eventually create us, and they guarded the secrets of the forge with a life and death intensity. By maintaining the sacredness of the metal, they ensured that the African Eden remained a place where progress didn't mean destruction, but a deeper harmony between human ingenuity and the laws of nature. It was an alchemical balance that the modern industrial world, in its messy rush for profit, completely failed to maintain. But as the world turned and the iron was redirected from the plow to the chain, the blacksmith's sacred status was eroded by the cold calculations of war and commerce. The spiritual fire was extinguished, leaving behind only the smoke and mirrors of a civilization that knows how to build machines, but has forgotten how to speak to the elements. Yet, in the quiet corners of the continent, the sparks still fly, and the old songs of the forge are still hummed by those who remember. The iron hasn't lost its memory. It's still waiting for the master's touch to transform the fall of the present back into the rise of our original power. In the heart of the African Eden, power didn't flow from a throne of ego, but from the balanced scales of the mother. Long before the world decided that leadership was a man's game, the great empires of Kush and Meroe were ruled by the Candaces, the lion queens who led armies and commanded the heavens with the same breath. It's a bit of a sophisticated jab at our modern struggles with equality, isn't it? To realize that the most ancient and sacred form of government was a matriarchy where the queen was the living embodiment of the goddess on earth, ensuring that the garden flourished through the wisdom of the womb. The irony of the later patriarchal fall is how it tried to paint the woman as the cause of the exile, while the African traditions knew she was the only one who held the key to the return. These queens weren't just figureheads. They were high initiates who understood that the divine feminine was the magnetic force that held the atoms of the community together. It's a bit rich, don't you think? That while the North was busy debating if women had souls, the African Eden was already being governed by women who were seen as the literal source of the soul itself. Imagine the royal court of Meroe, where the air was scented with myrrh, and the sound of gold anklets announced the arrival of a woman who held the power of life and death in her gaze. She wasn't hidden behind a veil. She sat on a throne carved with lions, her skin glowing with oils that reflected the setting sun. To the people, she was the moon that balanced the sun, a reminder that true authority is never about force, but about the ability to nurture and protect the God seed within every citizen. The sensory reality of her presence was a ritual in itself, a living proof that the paradise state was maintained through the harmony of the genders. This wasn't just politics, it was a cosmic alignment. The queens understood that the earth is feminine, and that by honoring the mother, the land would remain fertile and the rains would always come. They were the keepers of the lunar calendar, tracking the cycles of the blood and the stars to ensure that the human rhythm never fell out of sync with the celestial one. By placing the mother at the center of the garden, the African Eden avoided the fall into the competitive, destructive ego drive that would later define the history of the civilized world. But as the sun gods of the north began their conquest, the matriarchal line was systematically targeted and dismantled. The queens were turned into myths or concubines in the history books, and the sacred balance was tipped toward a one-sided, aggressive form of power. The mother was exiled from her own garden, and the world has been wandering in a spiritual desert ever since. Yet the lineage of the Candaces isn't dead. It's a dormant gene in the African soul, waiting for the moment the daughters of the Eden realize that the throne isn't lost. It's just been waiting for the right frequency to reclaim it. In the deep silence of the Yoruba heartland, the ancestors didn't need a silicon chip to calculate the mysteries of the universe. They had the Ifa. Long before the first computer was a spark in a scientist's mind, the priests of the African Eden were using a 16-bit binary system, a complex code of open and closed marks to download the blueprints of destiny. It's a bit of a cheeky reality check for our modern age, isn't it? To realize that the digital language we use to scroll through our lives is just a younger, less soulful version of a spiritual software that's been running in Africa for thousands of years. The irony is that while the world calls this divination or superstition, the math behind it is as solid as any algorithm found in Silicon Valley. The 256 Odu, the holy verses, are like a cosmic library where every possible human experience has already been indexed and stored. It's quite a sophisticated jab at our idea of free will, suggesting that we aren't just making it up as we go, but are actually navigating a vast pre-existing data field. The garden wasn't a place of mindless bliss. It was a realm governed by a perfect binary logic that linked the smallest leaf to the furthest star. Picture the Babalawo sitting on his mat, the air thick with the smell of palm kernels and the dry heat of the afternoon. As he casts the sacred chain, the sound of the shells hitting the wood is the sound of a system being queried. He isn't guessing, he's reading the code. The sensory experience is one of total clarity, a moment where the noise of the world falls away and the binary truth of the Ifar reveals the hidden bugs in a person's spirit. It was a technology of the soul, designed to keep the human path aligned with the original frequency of the Creator. This wasn't just about telling the future, it was about coding the present. The ancestors understood that by speaking the right verse, they could shift the energy of a situation, much like a programmer fixes a line of code to make a system run smoothly. They were the sysadmins of the African Eden, maintaining the balance of the community through a series of ritualistic updates. It's a level of informational intelligence that makes our current smart technology look pretty dim-witted by comparison, as we've traded a connection to the all for a connection to a Wi-Fi signal. But as the official history began to favor the written word over the lived code, the Ifar was shoved into the category of folklore. The binary genius of Africa was ignored, and the world lost its most direct link to the universal server. Yet the code is still running. In every corner of the diaspora, the Odu are still being chanted, proving that the African Eden wasn't just a physical start point, but a sophisticated mental operating system that can never be truly deleted. The software is just waiting for us to remember the password. It's a bit of a cosmic irony that the world spent centuries looking at Africa as a continent of the future or a relic of the past, completely missing the fact that the future has already happened there once before. The ruins of the African Eden aren't just stones. They're biological and spiritual landmarks, waiting for a generation to stop looking at them through a lens of pity and start looking through a lens of memory. We've been told the garden was lost because of a mistake, but the real fall was simply the moment we started believing the maps drawn by people who had never seen the sun rise over the Rift Valley. The irony of our modern awakening is that it's actually a remembering, a slow, deliberate peeling back of the labels that were slapped onto the motherland to keep her secrets safe. While the civilized world struggles with its own identity, the African soul is beginning to vibrate at that original, primordial frequency again. It's a bit of a cheeky revelation, isn't it? That the very people who were told they were the last in the race of progress are actually the first, carrying the God code in their marrow, just waiting for the signal to reboot the system. Imagine the moment when the collective amnesia finally breaks and the smell of the first rain on dry earth triggers a memory that goes back 100,000 years. The sensory shock of realizing you aren't a descendant of slaves, but an heir to the architects of the stars, is enough to tilt the world back onto its true axis. To return to the Eden isn't about a flight to a specific airport. It's about a flight of consciousness, reclaiming the symbols, the geometry, and the sound science that were stolen and rebranded. It's the ultimate homecoming in a world that has made us all feel like orphans. This isn't about restoring the past. It's about activating it. The ancestors didn't leave us ruins to mourn. They left us blueprints to use. By connecting the modern struggle for identity with the ancient reality of African genius, we bridge a gap that has been bleeding for 500 years. The garden is currently being reconstructed in every laboratory where African DNA is studied, in every studio where the beat of the drum is fused with the digital, and in every mind that refuses to accept the accepted history. It's a quiet, unstoppable resurrection of the first and final paradise. As the sun sets on the era of the old world lies, the horizon of the African Eden is glowing brighter than ever. The story didn't end with an expulsion. It just paused to see if we were strong enough to find our way back through the dark. The final enigma isn't where the garden was, but who we become once we realize we never actually left. The dust of the continent is on our shoes, the iron of the forge is in our blood, and the binary code of the Ifar is in our breath. The Eden is waking up, and this time it knows exactly who its children are. The gates of the African Eden were never made of iron or wood. They were made of memory. We have spent centuries wandering a world that felt cold and foreign, unaware that the blueprint for paradise was etched into our very DNA, waiting for the right frequency to wake it up. The story of the first garden didn't end with an exile. It was simply hidden in the rhythm of the drum, the geometry of the mask, and the silent strength of the baobab, preserved by ancestors who knew that one day we would be ready to listen again. As we stand on the threshold of a new era, we realize that the fall of humanity was nothing more than a long collective sleep. The sands of time are shifting, and the monuments of a genius we were told we didn't possess are rising from the dust to greet us. Africa isn't just the cradle of your body. It is the laboratory of your soul, the original source of every star map, every law of balance, and every spark of divine fire that has ever lit up the human mind. The journey doesn't end here, for many secrets still sleep beneath the red earth, and the star people are still whispering through the binary code of the ancients. Respect the past, for it is your foundation. Embrace the mystery, for it is your future. If you felt the echo of the Eden in your heart today, make sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications. Our journey into the forbidden history of the motherland is only just beginning. Walk in balance, remember your light, and never forget, you are the living evidence of the paradise that was.